I'm just the introduction, not the show, but they'll be in a minute. Good evening and welcome to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate and to our replica of the actual Senate chamber. How many of you are here for the first time tonight? Oh, good. Make this the first of many visits that you'll make to us. I want to extend a warm welcome to everyone and especially to our Institute members. Your support really helps us to provide dynamic, immersive experiences for students every day here at the Institute, where they try their hand at being a senator for the day and actually passing legislation. When Senator Kennedy envisioned the idea for the Institute, he was clear that he wanted it to not be solely about the Senate. He wanted to celebrate the Senate, but he wanted to mostly celebrate democracy. He wanted it to be a place where visitors of all ages could debate, negotiate, build a consensus, perhaps find common ground, but always find their way to be engaged in the work of democracy. He didn't want it just to be a place where legislation was discussed, nor was it to be a space only for politicians. He wanted the Institute to be a living, breathing monument to the dynamism of our democracy, a place where ideas could come to life. It's just with this vision in mind that we're hosting tonight's program. Our Getting to the Point series welcomes guests with unique perspectives from every walk of life to discuss their take on some of the key issues and challenges facing our country and our communities. Tonight's topic is news and comedy and how they intersect to provide insight. Our invited speaker tonight is Zhubin Parang, who, as many of you know, has been with Comedy Central for quite some time and the head writer of the show since 2015. And tonight he will talk about how his team has been adapting and responding to the unprecedented political and media climate that the 2016 presidential election ignited. You have seen, I'm sure, that in recent months, evening shows that blend comedy and current events have taken on an even greater role in our daily news consumption. Today, hard news headlines compete with clips from Chance the Rapper singing "Come Back Barack" on Saturday Night Live, and Trevor Noah reading out Karma's greatest achievements of 2017. As I said, laughter and insight. I was just telling the two of them, after a dose of Rachel, I need a little bit of Stephen Colbert. Parang's team at Comedy Central is continuously working to strike the right balance of humor and gravity as they shape the way that the nation consumes the news, and can't wait to hear what he has to say tonight. I'd like to thank you again for being here and ask you to join me in welcoming tonight's speakers as we hand the conversation over to our moderator for this evening, Sopop Deb, a former Boston Globe reporter, worked with CBS News, a BU alum, and now a culture writer for the New York Times. Sopan, we're looking forward to a great program. Gentlemen, please come in.
Hello, everybody. I think I speak for both of us in this is truly the most undeserved venue for us to be in.
To be speaking in the real-life replica of the Senate.
We have no idea. No. Thank you so much for coming. We both really appreciate it. We're in for a fun hour, we hope. But let's get started. So, Zhubin, you have a little bit of an interesting backstory. So before we get into all the stuff that we want to talk about, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you became a head writer for The Daily Show?
Yeah, sure. I got my way to comedy writing circuitously. I started out going to law school, and I practiced law for 4 years in a midtown Manhattan big law firm.
Lawyers are very much known for their comedy, of course.
You'd be surprised how many comedians are former lawyers. There's a lot of, I think, if you were a lawyer and you like doing or have any spark of creativity in you, you get really sick of practicing law very fast. And I think if you have absolutely no sense of wonder or joy about you, you really take to the law. And so it's either one or the other. I practiced law for about 4 years, mostly helping companies get money from other companies. Right. And after a while, I got tired of it. At the same time, I was doing improv comedy and sketch comedy in the New York comedy scene, mostly at the Upright Citizens Brigade. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, the friends I made there, when they started getting jobs at comedy shows, they recommended me for a job. One of them, Hallie Haglund, was a former, was a receptionist at The Daily Show, worked her way up to being writer at The Daily Show. She recommended me for the job, and I got the job thanks to her. So,
how much did you know about late night comedy writing when you first started the job?
Nothing at all. It's a really great thing about late night comedy that it's the most democratic of the TV writing jobs.
If you're funny, you're in.
If you can write a good packet, then it doesn't matter if you've had experience before. Come on in. Let's see if you work. If you don't, okay, it was great. You know, go back to the law. And luckily, they didn't say that to me. But I think, as opposed to sitcom writing, drama writing, late night is very much a kind of where a lot of TV writers get their start. Like very, very luckily for me.
Do you remember early on, maybe the most memorable or the first joke you ever got on television?
Yeah, it wasn't good. It was a very minor joke involving, at the time when I got the job, Jon Stewart was the host. This was back in 2011. It was a joke that involved how I think the Republicans in Congress needed another tax cut, which is actually funny now to think about it. Wow, it's amazing how has no relevance to today's news. But it was a very minor one-line joke about John. I wrote that John was saying they need it so bad. Give me another hit, baby. That was the entire joke. It was almost a throwaway joke, but just me watching it alone in my office, I just felt like the world had opened up for me. Mm-hmm. And I don't think John even remembers that year, much less that show, much less that joke. But
given that you had little to pretty much no experience in writing for comedy before starting The Daily Show, how long has it been, 6 years?
6 years, yeah.
What were your first couple years there like? Was it a big learning curve? Did you have to constantly prove yourself? Were you constantly getting talkings to from the higher up, saying you've got to shape up? What were the first couple years like?
No, they were terrifying. Just because at The Daily Show you are with the funniest people in the country, and they are in a room making each other laugh all day long. And every time you throw a joke out, if it bombs immediately, and it bombs very hard. And the first time you pitch a joke out and nobody laughs, you feel like you're going to be fired that afternoon. So it takes a while for you to sort of ramp up to match the pace of that. But The Daily Show is a very supportive environment. We're very collaborative. There's no sense of jealousy in the jokes. There's no sense of ownership or people counting jokes. I've been the head writer now for 2 years, and I regularly bomb in front of the entire room. I'll make a joke that, like, it's so embarrassingly quiet that people try to act like it was never even said. Just sort of there's like this silence, and then someone else says, like, so what do you think about this? And then everyone moves on. But that's just par for the course. And I think that if you have the confidence of a writer and the confidence to make a joke, The Daily Show is very supportive of it, and the writing staff and the producers will give you a lot of leeway.
Do the jokes? Tell me about the process. In that, is it as simple as you tell a joke, or you pitch a joke, the room laughs or it doesn't laugh, or can you, if it bombs at first, can you kind of talk the room into it? What's that process like?
Yeah, the really good thing about, especially with Trevor, is he is very excited about having a talkative room. So if you pitch a joke, even if the idea isn't quite there or the joke is half formed, Trevor will pick it up and keep playing with it. Other writers will take it and riff on it, and you can end up with a really, really good joke ultimately. I'm trying to think of an example of that. We had one that was, I'm not going to quite get it, but it was initially a joke about why we should do we should go back and look at some of Trump's greatest hits and figure out a way to go back and look at like the great moments that you miss about that you forgot about Trump. And that idea was kind of pitched out. Let's go back to talk about the. I forgot specifically, but it ended up with someone else pitching like, why don't we go back and do like a retro special on the Access Hollywood tape? And that ended up being its own act ultimately. Came out of just one person pitching. Shouldn't we go back and do something about how a few months ago Trump got in a fight with Rosie O'Donnell over something that shouldn't have made a difference at all? It's a half idea. It wasn't anything, but then that kind of got batted around to become a full segment on the show. You have to trust writers a lot for that. You have to really be willing to say an idea, even if it's not going to be funny, as long as you know there's a kernel of funny in there, to trust yourself and trust the room will take that and bat it around, not just go dead silent.
One of the things that I imagine you run into, or you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is about there are a lot of people who think they're comedians who are not comedians, who might stop by your room and say, I have a joke idea for you. Do you have a lot of people that aren't writers, whether it's producers or, a guy on the set, the lighting guy coming, hey, I've got a great joke for you. Why don't you try this one out? Do you get a lot of non-writers coming by and making suggestions? We do, actually. The entire staff is encouraged to pitch ideas and jokes. Really? Yeah, the producers do. So it's not siloed? Not at all, no. That's one of the great things about the show. Everybody's in the morning meeting. A lot of people, everybody is on the email listserv we do where we pitch jokes back and forth. If a joke is good, we have no jealousy about it. It's great, let's do it. Is that common for late night shows? Is that happening on other shows? Or do you feel like that's a very Trevor Noah, Jon Stewart specific thing? I don't know, honestly. It should be. I feel like if you are not taking advantage of because people can learn the voice of the show and the style just by osmosis, just by being around the show. So if you are not squeezing out all the juice of your staff, you're wasting very precious juice, in my opinion. Right. You need all that juice. You want to squeeze every person on staff into a husk and then throw them out. And that's the dream of any comedy show. That's as good of an analogy as we're going to get tonight. Absolutely, yeah. I'll come back to that. Let's wrap it up. I'll come back to that juice husk many times throughout this night. So Jon Stewart, he announces that he's leaving the show. Mm-hmm. Presumably he told the staff first before going on the air that. Yes. Your reaction was what? Heartbreak, shock, sadness. Where's a bar? Where's the nearest bar? I think it makes sense. It still makes sense for Jon to have left when he did. But I was in college. I was watching Jon on The Daily Show. I thought of him and I think of him as a comedy mentor. But going beyond your feelings about Jon, were you thinking? Did he talk about me? Did he ask you about me? Is that why you brought that up? Yeah, right. Well, were you thinking about yourself? Like, oh God, I have to go find something else to do now? Or were you, how much were you worried about your own future at that point? Oh, sure. Everybody was worried. I was worried because, you don't know who the next person is coming in. And at the time, too, there was an enormous amount of speculation by people who had no idea what they were talking about, all throughout Twitter, all throughout. Twitter's a great place to find people that know what they're talking about. It's a great place to find. Yeah, if you ever are not stressed, Twitter really fixes that problem very quickly. So it was very difficult to sort of conceive a future. But my ultimate thought was, even with Jon gone, this team is such a wonderful team that I want to stay with them and see what comes next together as a family, even if the father has left. So when Trevor is announced, his first couple of months, I think, he had very, very enormously large shoes to fill. Absolutely. As the writing staff, did you guys have to change your approach? Did you guys pretty much just put the same show on with Trevor in the driver's seat? What was the transition like? Yeah, initially, actually, because we only had, I think, 8 weeks before Trevor's first show from Jon's last show.
So there wasn't a lot of time to
Process.
sit down and reconstitute the show. And once you actually, it's difficult to redesign a plane while you're flying the plane. And once we started doing shows, it was very difficult to start changing the process. And also Trevor was just learning what a process was that he could do.
But did you have to change how you wrote?
Oh, immediately, yeah.
And how do you do that? Do you watch a lot of his stand-up specials, or what's the process for that?
A large chunk of it is, with any specific host, is just learning it by doing it. But beforehand, I watched his specials. I watched his other stand-up bits that he would do here and there on different shows. He had an old show in South Africa that I watched whatever episodes of that I could find on YouTube. Ultimately, though, that was a process that only really started once he joined the show. There was a time, I think you would see in the early episodes of Trevor's run, where it very much felt like Trevor was reading a script that had been written by John.
Which leads me to my next question, which is, what's the difference between writing a joke for John and writing a joke for Trevor? What's a joke that you don't have to tell me the joke, but what kind of joke works for John, or what kind of joke works for Trevor?
I think that in a larger sense of style, Jon Stewart builds a case. He has an opinion on something. He marshals arguments in favor of it. He goes to sound clips to show contrasting points of view that he then makes fun of or argues against, all to make a case. Trevor tells a story. Trevor wants an episode of The Daily Show to feel like he's sitting in front of you, talking to you like a friend would about what he just heard and showing you like clips on his phone about it. In terms of the specific style of jokes, John has, I would say John is more verbal and more clever in his jokes. Trevor is more performative. You can write a joke for Trevor that is almost like is almost like a Family Guy sketch in a little bit in a way, where it starts out with a premise and he starts acting it out, and then it suddenly takes a different turn in a direction that is surprising and doesn't really necessarily have to do with the original joke. John, I don't think you would do that. He was much tighter. He was much more focused on a specific joke that told his point of view in a clever way. And that's something that initially all our jokes were that way, because that was how the machine had been built for Trevor. So it was like, here's some John jokes. And Trevor would be like, okay, here's some of my jokes. Right. Why don't we do this? And then over time, we started being more like, here's some Trevor jokes. And he'd be like, well, these are closer to John jokes than Trevor jokes. And after time, it was like, okay, now these are Trevor jokes.
Do you feel like you have reached that equilibrium now, or is that still kind of a work in progress?
I think it's always like a work in progress, because Trevor himself also grows throughout the process. He's not static in any way. But I'm very happy with where we are now. I think we hit a stride last year that I think feels more honest to Trevor and is more in his voice than it was the previous year, and since then it's just been better and better. So I'm very confident.
Right.
Maybe unnecessarily so, but I'm naturally a confident guy. So
listen, unnecessary confidence
it's the best
never hurts.
Yeah, you need it. You need it.
So I was talking to someone prominently involved with the late night show recently, and something
Name
this person
names.
something that this person told me was he expressed frustration about external pressures of shows being forced to joke about things that aren't necessarily funny, but that if they don't joke about them, they're going to get criticized for it. And a couple recent examples, of course, include the Louis C.K. scandal. You have Al Franken, Harvey Weinstein, and in those first couple days after those initial scandals broke, you have a case where it seemed like the comedy world as a whole was kind of like, I guess we have to joke about this, so we will. Do you find that frustrating? What are your thoughts on that?
I guess in general, I'm reluctant to. I want to make sure that whatever we talk about is something we want to talk about. I just
do you feel like you're able to do that still in this environment? Are you able to, for the most part, talk about what you want to talk about, or do you feel like your hand is being forced a lot in a way?
No, by and large, I do feel that. It also these stories, the Harvey Weinstein, the Al Franken stories, are big stories of the day. So we would talk about them regardless. But I do think you're right that there are. There's a lot more attention paid to comedy shows in the last couple of years than there have been ever before, and there's a lot more scrutiny on them. I don't know if that's necessarily a healthy thing.
Well, you're being treated in the way journalists are.
Yeah.
If
and I
the
guess
New York
I object to
Times
that.
or Washington Post doesn't cover something, that's a story. Or if what it chooses to cover is also a story.
I would say I object to being placed on the level
Yeah.
of the New York Times and Washington Post.
We're much lower, right?
Yeah.
We're
To
not
have
the
to
you guys.
lower myself to the vagaries of the style section, I can't believe it.
Yeah, right.
No, I don't think it's the Washington Post and the New York Times are different organizations fundamentally than the Daily Show is, and I guess I don't like the idea that we are that people look to us the same way that they would look to the New York Times.
Do you believe, John used to say when he was hosting the Daily Shows that, well, we're just a comedy show. That's what we are. That we're nothing more than that, nothing, But, there are studies that show people tune in to get their news from the Daily Show.
That's a bad idea. That's a terrible idea. You shouldn't do it.
Tell me about it. Subscribe to the
I know,
Times, will you?
yeah.
Please. No. Do you
It's just
still...
what, $7 a year or something? Is that what it is? If it's any higher than that, I won't
Right.
pay for it.
But do you believe that fundamentally all that the Daily Show is at this point is just a comedy show?
Ultimately, yes. I don't think it's fair to anybody involved to expect us to be a news-gathering organization for the simple reason that we're not structured that way. We don't have an investigative reporting division. We don't have a news-gathering division. We don't even have people who aggregate news sites and check through them. We just make commentary on the news of the day.
By the way, you saying that you don't have resources to do journalism makes you sound like a journalist. That's what we do all day.
You just complain about being
Please give us more money to do things, yeah.
If the definition of journalism is lack of money, then aren't we all journalists in today?
Right.
I think that, I guess my concern with that is I don't want viewers to tune into our show not aware of what the news of the day is. I want them to be informed viewers so that they will get the jokes. They'll understand what we're commenting on. And I do not want a population that is not looking outside of comedy shows for news. Mm-hmm. There's so much phenomenal reporting going on today by the Times, by the Post, that I don't want people to ignore that in favor of watching our 8-minute segment on whatever of that we thought was funny enough to talk about. Mm-hmm. It's a disservice to the people who are looking to us.
If you're not journalists or trying to be journalists, is it fair to say the Daily Show is trying to influence people and trying to change the minds of those that might disagree with the political views of, because it clearly comes from a certain political ideological viewpoint. Is it fair to say that the show, because oftentimes, as you mentioned with John, and I think it's on some level the case with Trevor, they're playing video, they're building an argument in a lot of these opening segments where, you're starting out with a premise, cutting to video clips, and then cutting to other video clips that contradict what other people are saying. It feels often like you're building that case for a certain viewpoint. Is it fair to say that you guys, or whether you guys are trying to do journalism or not, that you're trying to at least influence your viewers in a certain way?
Well, I think what we are trying to do is get across our point of view comedically. And I don't think that necessarily means we're hoping that it doesn't mean that we're hoping people will change their minds to that point of view. If they do, because our argument or jokes were so hilarious that they're like, I have no choice but to agree with your position now, great.
Well, that's my question, right? So if the average Joe walks away from another Daily Show cracking up, but still does not change their view in any shape, way, or form, do you feel less fulfilled as a result?
No, I think our job is to comment on the news in a funny way. I think if you pursue the objective of changing minds instead of telling the funniest jokes you have in the most honest way you can, I think you sacrifice comedy for politics in a way that doesn't make you a comedian. It makes you a politician who's funny. And I know that sounds like a semantic difference, but it's a significant difference to me. Mm-hmm. If you're a comedian with a point of view versus you are a political actor who just happens to know how to tell a joke.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about, the Trump era.
Year one of 38, baby. It's going to be a long, long era.
So obviously, there's no shortage between Twitter, YouTube, a host of late night shows, Colbert, Sam B, you have the President Show, you have the Opposition, you have your show. Do you feel...
That wasn't a ranking, I hope.
No,
Right,
no,
yeah.
not in that order.
Great.
Do you feel like there is a bubble that's about to burst in terms of Trump-related comedy, in that there's just too much of it? There's just going to be a blowback from viewers who just want to get away from politics, get away from hearing about Trump or whatever. Do you feel like that's going to happen?
I mean, it's got to at some point, right? But the guy just never stops making news. He just doesn't stop pumping out comedy bits for us. So I'm sure at some point the public will burn out on it. But I don't see that anytime soon. It might be after he's no longer in office. It might be halfway through it. I don't see it I don't see any light at the end of this tunnel, either for us or America. But I don't see how that's gonna. I don't see it.
During the campaign, I think it was Stephen Colbert that said, Donald Trump winning would be such a boon to late night comedy. And if you look at the numbers, it has been, right?
Yeah. I should have put money in it. I wish we had stock.
Do you feel that has Donald Trump, with how saturated the market is with people making Trump jokes in the late night show, has Trump's election made it easier or harder to make jokes about politics?
It's done both in a very frustrating way. It's never been easier to make. The jokes about Trump are always there. Every day he puts out something that is so easy to make fun of and almost demands you make fun of it. We tried to do a show just this last Thursday or Wednesday where we were talking about the Senate hearing on the nuclear authority granted to the president, which is itself a Trump story. But we had to go back and rewrite the show because at 5 o'clock Trump took a drink of water weird. And that meant that... So on the one hand, it's very easy to write those jokes. They come at you very fast and furious. But at the same time, it crowds out the space for any other kind of joke about any other kind of story. So you find yourself drowning in Trump.
How does that affect you as a writer? Do you yourself have Trump fatigue?
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm swimming in it.
My point is, do you like your job? Is my point.
Every day is a nightmare of misery. But it's been that way for most of my life. So as a comedy writer, most of my life is a nightmare of misery. Right. So I think it's definitely exhausting. I, for example, have Trump's tweets sent to my phone, notification.
Oh yeah,
because I have to know what he said about anything right away. Is it terrible to wake up at 7 a.m. and see he's tweeted 40 tweets out about why the dad of the UCLA basketball players should apologize to him? Yeah, but at the same time, we're all in this together. I'm not. Right. I'm not. I would not be able to ignore it if I wasn't a comedy writer. In fact, it'd be worse. I wouldn't even have the catharsis of getting in a room with funny people and joking about it. So in a way, yeah, I'm miserable. But I think any other place I would work at would be even more miserable. I'm the least miserable of all of you people. So
there were a number of pieces written, especially near the election or after the election, think pieces, about how late night comedy was playing into Trump's hands. About how the constant mocking, derision was alienating, the 60 million that voted for him, and it wasn't really helping things. What did you think of that?
I mean, he won, It's,
right.
It's hard to argue for the importance and influence of late night comedy when there were some 8 or 9 shows opening both barrels on him every day for 2 years. I think ultimately, and I'm a little bit...
Well, I suppose the argument was that it hurt. It hurt the cause that liberals were... It hurt the very cause that the comedians themselves were championing.
Well, I don't know.
By being so constant, by being so, nonstop with it.
I don't know about that. And I guess I feel like the country's polarized enough that I don't really know or think that you are speaking to an audience that doesn't already agree with you to some extent. Mm-hmm. And I think that people who were going to vote for Trump because of what late night comedians were saying about him would have voted for Trump because of what Hollywood actors were saying about him or what Nancy Pelosi was saying about him. The sentiment of I'm voting to make to flip my finger at this group of Americans that I don't like, I think was already there in the system. I think it was more likely that we were just not that important than we tipped the scales.
Don't sell yourself short there, buddy.
No, I'm useless. We're insignificant in this massive Trump tidal wave.
Right. Do you find that for a comedian, I mean, not everybody does comedy for the same reasons. You know, some people do it, like Jerry Seinfeld, they just want to talk about toasters, and that's what they want to do. Or some people just want to talk about heartbreak, and that's what they want to do. Do you feel like to be a late-night writer right now, you have to have a level of cynicism that maybe you didn't have to have back when if you were writing for Jay Leno?
What do you mean by cynicism?
Distrust in people, distrust in institutions, distrust in the American politic as a whole.
I guess when I think of cynicism...
Let me put it this way. Could Jay Leno's show right now, if you are a writer that really wrote Jay Leno-type jokes, if you're a Jay Leno-type comic, could that kind of comic succeed in the late-night atmosphere today? And I think we kind of have our answer a little bit with Jimmy Fallon, whose numbers kind of took a tumble after the election this year.
That's true. I do think we are in an era that is much more politically sensitive than before the campaign, and I think that you definitely risk a little loss of relevancy if you want to stick to non-political topics. At the same time, though, that is a pendulum that will switch back at some point. I think that right now it's probably easier to have a political point of view just because the audience demands it more. But I don't think that it's a good idea if you are not a politically oriented late night writer to try to be something you're not.
Right.
I think that ultimately shows they rise or they fall on the strength of the host and on the honesty of the host's voice. And if your host is not necessarily a political person, I think Jimmy Fallon has said that he's not that guy. I think it'd be worse for Jimmy Fallon to try and pretend to be a Colbert or Trevor Noah than to be just Jimmy Fallon and ride the wave until it washes him up on shore. I went into that metaphor
He's
really
very much
confidently.
alive, just to clarify.
This is a part of being a head writer that's important. You have to really just dive into a metaphor, even if it is the wrong one.
Right.
Because if you show any weakness in that writer's room, they will eat you alive.
Right. I like this question a lot. This is an audience question. Creatively, Marilyn Carson, thank you for this question, wherever you are, Marilyn.
Thank you, Marilyn.
I only had 20 minutes of questions, so I'm glad you guys wrote some to us. Creatively, what keeps you awake at night?
You think it would be Donald Trump blowing up the news day by doing something crazy, but that actually
But hasn't he done that
energizing.
enough that you're just kind of conditioned to?
Yeah.
You just know what to do. There's a routine for this stuff.
Yeah, and it's in its own way, it's very energizing. It's exhausting, but it feels as exciting as any moment of the job. There was one particular week in March where news broke at almost 5 o'clock every day, which is when every late night show is about to tape. I think it was the week when Trump fired Comey, Rosenstein appointed a special prosecutor, Trump got caught saying to the Russian ambassador that now that he was fired Comey, he's much more able to breathe now, and the pressure's off his back. And these stories all broke at 5 o'clock, which was such an exhausting, if there is such a thing as PTSD for late night writers, and there's not, but if there was such a thing, every late night writer has PTSD from that 1 week alone. And after that, where we were scrambling to rewrite an entire show with half an hour until the red light came on, I think it's now much more exciting to be dealing with these late-breaking stories, even if you can't really address them with more than a joke or two. But I would say creatively what keeps me up at night is the idea that there's so much political comedy on now that if we were to...
I mean, how much of a struggle is it to stay unique, right? Because by the time the story breaks at noon, you've got 1 million people on Twitter making jokes. You have
that is what
eight
creatively,
or nine other shows making jokes about it. What's your challenge? How do you be... Are you even thinking about what the other shows are doing? How are you able to...
Generally, we don't. And I think creatively what worries me is
But do you often find the same jokes being made on all 4 or 5 late night shows?
Sometimes, yeah. It's difficult to do because there's only so many topics. There's only so many jokes you can make about, Mitch McConnell in a day. You know, there's only so many nicknames you can come up with Donald Trump. You can case Cinnamon Hitler, but someone else has said sentient caps lock key, and at some point you're just sort of repeating. So there is that to an extent. I think the way to solve that is by delving deeper into the voice of your host. Trevor can say jokes that, Jordan Klepper cannot. Sam B can say jokes that Colbert cannot.
Right.
But there's always going to be a little bit of that, and I think creatively...
So it's about being authentic.
Say again?
You have to be authentic to yourself.
That's how to do it. I think there was a time a few months ago where we did a field piece that was... Because Trump had cut the budget so deeply for Meals on Wheels and for various social programs, but it was wanting to increase the military budget, we did a field piece where we turned Meals on Wheels into a military operation. It was really funny, it was great, and only after we aired it did we realize that Conan O'Brien had done that same bit a week before. And that was horrible for the show and for me personally. I think Conan O'Brien, aside from Trevor, might be my favorite late night comic. I grew up watching him. I love him, and the idea that we had stepped on their shoes, even though we didn't know, was mortifying.
Do you have someone whose only job it is to keep track of what the other late night shows have done? This way, something like that doesn't.
We have our phenomenal researcher Adam Chodikoff takes it upon himself to watch a lot of the shows. So if we start pitching jokes that are very similar, he can cut that off and say, let's go in this different direction. So
gotcha.
Yeah, we do. But even he can't watch everything. I think there's like 40,000 late night shows now. So
yeah,
I don't 45.
Know, that's exactly the number.
Around there, so
40,000.
It's a lot. So
right.
It's hard for him to even keep up.
Right. I'm going to put you on the spot here. We talked about your first show that you ever told, or that ever made TV. Is there a segment or a joke that made air in your 6 years that you wish you could take back? Like, oh, I wish that didn't make air, or I wish we thought through that one, or they like,
For comedy reasons or for...
Let's start with the second thing, which is it made air and maybe, it got blowback and it wasn't...
I don't know. I don't think so. I can't think of one. We have a lot of...
Sam B had the thing over the summer with... It was a field piece with,
right.
When they went to CPAC, I think it was, and they said somebody who had cancer said he had like a Nazi haircut or something like that.
Yeah.
Has the Daily Show? I personally couldn't think of anything off the top of my head, but has the Daily Show ever had something like that in the last?
I can't think of one. We have several layers of writers and producers who I think ultimately that's a really good filter that stops jokes that would be problematic before they come on air. I know there was one time where it was actually during Comey's testimony before Congress, where he was being challenged repeatedly on his memory and on the events as he described with Donald Trump. Republican senators or congressmen, I don't remember which one it was, were repeatedly suggesting that he wasn't telling the truth or didn't remember it correctly. And at one point, one of the writers made a pitch that, I now, like Trevor would say, I now know, watching Comey, how it feels like to be a woman who is making an accusation of a sexual assault, to be questioned by men in a way that is suggesting that you're lying or you're wrong, which I thought was a great joke. Several of the women on the writing staff and in the production staff said that joke, even if it was well-intentioned, made it too much light of sexual assault to do. And Trevor immediately was like, well, then we're not doing it. Then we're not doing it. And that's something, I guess, in retrospect, probably was a good thing that we didn't air. To give you an example of how many layers there are, jokes are a dime a dozen. It's very easy to make jokes. So there's no joke that's so good, that's so precious, that we have to do it even if it's deeply offensive to people or insulting. If people who say that are not funny. So I think if a joke is hurtful or offensive in a way that is not intended to be, not your target, then you can always come up with another joke.
Late night writers rooms going back decades have always been very, very white and very, very male. If I'm just curious how. Not speaking about this specifically, but generally, has that gotten better? Is that still a huge problem? Like, how would you...
It's gotten better. It's still a big problem. I think, to a certain extent, the farm systems that a lot of comedy writers come from also tend to be predominantly white and male.
But part of it's right, because to go through an improv school like UCB, you have to pay thousands of dollars to make your program.
Yeah, there's definitely, you're definitely advantaged if you have money, if you can, if you tend to look like the teachers, then you tend to just do better because they naturally identify with you more. I think our show goes to great lengths to get as much of a diverse pool of applicants as possible, and then we blind the submission so we don't know whose submission we're reading. I think that's working on all levels of comedy right now. I know the UCB is trying to get a diverse group of students, look to get a diverse group of teachers. It's a constant goal, and it's something you have to be vigilant about at all times. It's definitely better than it was. I think across the board in late night comedy, but it's nowhere near truly representative, I would say, at all.
Gotcha. Okay, so I think we have 15 minutes left, so I think we were going to take some audience questions. We have a roving microphone somewhere, I believe. Raise your hand if you're a roving microphone. Mm-hmm. Oh, so there's a roving microphone up there and down here somewhere. Okay, so
all the microphones are up there.
So raise your hand if you have a question. Oh, and there's one right here too.
There.
There's a question right there.
Saw Trevor Noah doing stand-up at the Wilbur Theater here a few months ago, and he did very little on Trump actually, but I would say his act was really informed by where he comes from and the fact that he's traveled the world a great deal. So how much do you think that informs the nightly show and what he does?
I think Trevor's worldview, his perspective, is the Daily Show exists because of Trevor Noah, and I think that his voice totally informs it. I love working with Trevor so much, partly because he, having been from South Africa, has already lived through the Trump era. The South African president, Jacob Zuma, is basically an African Trump, with the almost exact same levels of media bashing, with appeal by division of rural and elite populations, very extravagant proclamations and promises. He also can't read numbers very well, like Donald Trump. Like, it's almost down to a T. And there is a level of Trevor comes to the Trump era with a sense of calm that we've been through this before. America can get through this. We can all get through this together. That personally, as an American who has not experienced anything like Donald Trump, I find enormously appealing and very calming. I don't know how I would have dealt with Donald Trump if I was dealing with any other late night host. I'm very, very happy, just my own personal style, that Trevor is that way. And I think that level of fun that Trevor can bring to it, because he is used to this, I think makes the show, in my opinion, very fun and much more free to laugh and have that kind of that cathartic release of laughter than I think otherwise it would be.
There's a question back there, up top there.
Thank you very much for taking my question. I just wanted to, I think you touched upon this briefly, but the transition from being a lawyer, going to law school, being a lawyer, to comedy, how was that transition, and what made you think that, I'm never going back to law, since it was pretty much a big investment to go that route in the first place?
Yeah, no, it was a huge waste of money and time to be a lawyer. Yeah. I think ultimately I practiced law for about 4 years, and it was pretty clear that to me that I wasn't good at it because I didn't love it. And as opposed to comedy, which I had a passion for, I thought for sure that even if I bomb out of the Daily Show, I'm doing something that I love doing, and that surely will get me some subsistence living, if only writing, jokes on the subway for people who are walking by. So I think that I think it wasn't so much a moment of I know I'm leaving the law as much as it was moving towards comedy and finding if I didn't like anything, I don't know what I would have done. I probably would still be a lawyer, I would probably be talking to you guys still, but as a lawyer, I think. I think we would have ended up here anyway.
World famous lawyer.
We were all destined to be here, yeah.
Someone from... No? Okay. Right over there.
Oh, it's on. You talked a little bit about the sensitivity of some of the jokes and how you navigate the waters of, lines that could be offensive on different levels or to different levels of people working on the show and in the audience. But how, when you're handed a really heavy news story, which is the reality these days, when is the right time to make a joke after that? And I've seen Trevor do that on the show, bounce back from here's where we're at, all right, on to the next piece. But how do you deal with those transitions between the really dark going to the funny and finding the funny, if there's any funny in it?
Yeah, it's hard, and we've had an enormous amount of experience with it because of the frequent mass shootings that happen in the United States. Almost every 2 months, we usually have to do some story about it. I think any topic you can make a joke about. It just depends on what the target is and what you're making fun of. Trevor has a very good sense of pacing for that. I remember with the Las Vegas shooting, when we started the segment, he talked for a minute without making a joke, just talking about the horror of it. The first joke he made, ultimately, was a joke about politicians who usually use moments of gun violence as a reason that we shouldn't talk about gun violence at this moment. And the joke coming out of that was Trevor saying he wishes he could use that when he was getting grounded. He could be like, Mom, now is not the time to talk about my curfew. We must unite as a family around the fact that I'm stuck in the window trying to sneak out. It was the first, after like a minute of talking, you find moments where there are jokes to be made. And I think that pace ultimately is what makes you a really good performer or not, finding that pace in the room with the audience. I think Trevor's good at that. But I think ultimately you can make a joke about anything. It's just what the joke is, who it's targeting, what it's about. If that answers your question.
Right up top there. Just yell, man. It's cool.
Yeah.
It's the Senate floor.
You
This
got
is
a
what we
booming
do.
voice, yeah.
Just filibuster. It's cool.
Calm down. Hit someone with a cane. It's all you, man.
Him, just to clarify. Right, okay.
Yeah.
But, as a person who has a lot of friends who are not necessarily interested in what is going on in the country politically, I have used The Daily Show as a tool to get my friends more interested in, things that are happening on Capitol Hill that are affecting their lives every day. So what kind of caution would you issue to me for using it as a tool to get people interested in the news?
I like that you totally put him on blast earlier.
Yeah.
Don't do what that guy does.
Look, man, if you're watching the show and watching the ads, then I'm happy. Whatever it takes to do it. Ultimately, this is a cynical money-making operation, so I don't care. No, I think that it's great if someone who is not informed about politics or current events gets interested in politics and current events from watching our show. I think a greater engagement in politics is fantastic, no matter how it's found. I guess I would also, the only thing I would say is there's so much more news than what we pick out for 8 minutes a night, or any late night show can pick out for 8 minutes a night. And to the extent that you can get them excited about what's going on in the world outside of what we happen to talk about, the big problem with especially like the nightly shows like us and Colbert, is that we are very reactive to the news of the day, which usually means that it's whatever Trump just said or what he did, what nation or ethnicity he insulted that day, and you leave out major stories like the crisis in Yemen, the coup in Zimbabwe. That's not a coup, but it's kind of a coup, but everything's fine. That sort of stuff that I think if The Daily Show or a late night comedy is a launching pad to someone getting more interested in that stuff, that's fantastic. I guess I would say encourage your friend to read the New York Times after they've watched every episode of The Daily Show, and that would be great.
We have a question over there at the top.
Okay. You talked about like the Conan incident and with joke stealing. Have you noticed that with
Not joke stealing.
well, yeah.
If anything,
This is on
Conan-
tape.
stealing.
Just remember, this is
For
on
lack-
tape.
Yeah, lack of a
Conan might
better
have
term.
reverse stolen the joke from us. Now that I think about it, gone back in time.
Yeah, lack of it, sorry. But have you noticed with like the new age of social media and rise in like content creators, has that provided a new obstacle in writing these jokes?
Well, Conan's literally dealing with that. With the lawsuit. I mean, Conan,
Oh yeah, well, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Conan O'Brien literally is getting sued because, and the judge, I believe, let the lawsuit move forward because a couple of jokes that Conan writers made look very, very similar to, I think, jokes either made on Twitter or in some sort of blog post or something like that. But anyway, I'm sorry.
No,
This is about me, of course, so please.
In some ways, it's good because it does help you as because a lot of jokes on Twitter are first thought jokes. They're whatever the immediate thought is about what's funny about this, what we can immediately. I feel like right now, almost any incident where a conservative woman is caught breaking the law or engaging in some minor misdemeanor, there's 100,000 Twitter users saying lock her up, and I think it teaches you as a comedy writer not to go for the first thought, the first joke, especially by the time now in this news cycle or with social media, by the time our show airs, all the first thought jokes have been taken up, not just by users, but also by our own Twitter accounts and all the other late night Twitter accounts. So it really encourages you to go, again, to delve into your own host's voice about to find what is it that's funny that only that host can say. There's another example of this that to go to Trevor's point about, or my point about how his jokes are very performative. We had a joke while we were in Chicago a few weeks ago, where it was the Monday that Trump came out with Mitch McConnell and was asked by reporters about why he hadn't. Or if he had anything to say to the Gold Star families he was asked by reporters what he had to say about the soldiers who were killed in Niger. And Trump responded by saying that Obama never writes or calls Gold Star families. He likes to write and call Gold Star families, but he didn't do it. But he plans to, unlike Obama, who did do it. And that resulted in a week of stories. And the major bit we went with ultimately on that, which was something that Trevor, I think, only could do, was talking about how the whole purpose of that press conference was Trump was coming out with Mitch McConnell to say that everything was fine. That was the entire point of it, and it ended up being a weeks-long fiasco about his relationship to Gold Star families. He got in a fight with a Florida congresswoman in the subsequent few days about what he had said to one Gold Star family. He got in a big fiasco about a $25,000 check he had pledged to one Gold Star father that he never made good on. And the joke we ultimately came up with was Trevor saying, "Can you imagine what it must be like to be in the Trump administration and to be there before and after a press conference, but not during? To just be a guy who's like, what are you guys going to talk about?" It's like, "Oh, we're just going to go out and say everything's fine. That's it? Okay, I'm going to go to the bathroom." He comes out later, 10 minutes later, "Okay, we need a $25,000 check. We're in a fight with a black lady in Florida with a cowboy hat, and we need to listen to Gold Star family." It's like, "What happened? What?" I was like, "Forget about what happened. We got to do that." And even with Charlottesville, it was the same thing, where he was going to go out to talk about infrastructure. And he comes out 10 minutes later, "I need a list of good Nazis. Do we have good Nazis?" And that's the kind of thing that I think is Trevor can build on that and come to that in a way that I don't think any other late night comedian can. And I think that's what you have to delve into. It's a very long answer to your joke about Twitter.
I think we have time for two more. There's one here from up top, and we'll go down here after.
So I'm just kind of curious, when you go and you write a show and you write jokes, how much influence on the ethics of journalism do you have on writing a show and writing these jokes to kind of help, I guess, not distance yourself from being the real fake news, but from CNN and MSNBC and these other news networks?
Sorry, can I just ask are you asking what do you think our obligation is to be
Journalistically ethical?
Yeah, the ethic, trying to stay.
How ethical are you guys journalistically? Are you guys
Yeah.
hewing to that at all in the writer's room? Are you thinking about?
I mean, for a team of writers that write a lot of dildo jokes, I guess we're fairly ethical. I think we have an obligation. I think we have an obligation to be honest, to not lie, to not get facts wrong. I don't think we have a ethic of objectivity. We're commenters, but it is important to us to be honest and factual. We're not going to make stuff up, and we have. I said Adam Chodikoff, a guy who's devoted to making sure that nothing we say is wrong. But I think that's our ethics. Are we being honest about the joke we're making? Is the joke we're making something we believe? Is it factually true? Is the premise sound? And I think that's the ethics I think a comedian should hold themselves up to. Are they being honest to their own voice and to their truth? I think if you don't do that, you're ultimately, at some level, a propagandist.
Last question. I think we had one right there.
I'm sorry, wait for that.
Question is simply about your own creativity. What are you doing in your downtime? What are you watching, listening to? What is your go-to source to make you laugh?
Good question.
Do you laugh when you're not?
Not really. Not really. It's not a. I think, it's amazing how happy I am just rewatching old Simpsons episodes. It's very absurd to say. I watch a lot of comedies. I watch a lot of. I grew up with a generation of comedians who now have their own shows. So, Broad City, Search Party. I think that I watch a lot of it.
Do you take in comedy in the same way that everyone else does? Like when you're watching Broad City, are you watching it in the same way, or are you watching with a critical eye? Are you watching with that joke could have been better? No,
I don't watch it with a critical eye in that way. I do watch it more and this sounds so. Wow, I'm going to sound so jaded, but I don't laugh at any comedy show so much as I appreciate the comedy.
That's the most hipster thing I've ever heard.
I will be.
What?
I
don't laugh. I appreciate.
I'm dead inside. I think just I was not saying I don't enjoy it. I think that I can be. I'm impressed by comedies more than I. Laugh at, that I'm surprised by comedy. I should put it that way. Shows can have really good joke structure and really work well together. Rick and Morty right now is a show that is genius in its level of jokes and plot. And if you were to watch me watch it, you would think that I am not enjoying myself at all. I just sit there being like,
You are not invited to any comedy show.
No. I'd be a terrible audience member.
I don't want you there.
I'd be a terrible audience member. I think that in general, I do watch a lot of comedies. I watch all big comedies now. Kimmy Schmidt, Veeps. I watch Veeps. Yes, it's not like I don't watch anything. Veep. I watch them all. I think that when I'm looking to surprise myself, to laugh at something that I am genuinely shocked by, it sounds weird to say, but I almost prefer it in a drama when I'm not expecting it. There's an episode of, this is so sad, there's an episode of Game of Thrones where it was just a stupid bit where Daenerys Targaryen had someone read out the list of her titles, and it was like a minute-long list of titles. And then Jon Snow had his guy just be like, oh yeah, that's Jon Snow, he's King of the North. And I paused it, I was laughing so hard. And I think I guess really, ultimately comedy is something that's surprising to you. And I think when you do as much comedy as I do, you tend to, it's harder to get surprised, I guess. If you were to slide off right now and like land on your butt, I would laugh harder than I think I would have laughed. That's ultimately it comes back down to a toddler level of comedy.
I've been thinking a lot about The Simpsons and how I can't watch it anymore because of
what?
This, because Hari Kondabolu has a new documentary out called I think it's called Hating Apu, and it's about how Apu was such a stereotypically Indian character that it caused a lot of like a whole generation of Indian kids to get made fun of as a kid. And it's something I never thought about. Then I was like, oh yeah, wait, as a kid, I had a lot of people coming up to me and like doing the Apu voice. I was like, oh
That's
yeah.
True. But wouldn't you say that Apu also became a full-fledged character in his own right?
But he was still always this is a whole separate panel, by the way.
Well, this is another hour. You're all here now. We're going ahead.
Come to the reception after. But he was always a convenience store owner, though. And he was always a brown guy played... This is the point that Hari makes.
Sure.
In the doc, which is he's always a brown guy played by a white guy strictly to make fun of a brown guy. You know what I mean?
I think we're going to find, as time goes on, that many of the shows we grew up with are going to be problematic by today's standards.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be a real cultural journey to find out at what level we can enjoy art from the past in a way that acknowledges its problematic issues today, but at the same time doesn't judge them by today's standards.
Yeah, right.
And it might just be a level of, it might just come down to, I really liked it though.
Right. Well, in all seriousness, thank you so much for coming tonight. You guys have been a wonderful
Thank you, guys.
crowd. We really appreciate it. There's Gene. Oh, I believe Gene, I'm handing it off.
Thank you very much. I think we all enjoyed it and had a few laughs as well. Please join us out in the lobby for a reception and further conversation. Hope you'll come again.
Are we off? I think we're off, right? That was good. Oh, you sat on your thing. I didn't realize you were there.
Sitting it?
I think you didn't realize.